Bobby Halton, Mike Dugan, and Daryl Liggins, and you are on the Humpday Hangout today, and we're going to be talking about fires and buildings under construction and associated risks and issues that go along with that. And it's a great pleasure to be with you here today. And some of our regulars can't make it today due to other commitments, Billy Guston and Jack Murphy and a few others. So we'll be talking about our experiences, and hopefully you can reach us at hashtag FE Talk. That's hashtag FE Talk if you want to send us something, and we'll be happy to bring you into the conversation. So should be a really interesting conversation. Both these guys have tremendous experience with that. But first, we'd like to mention our sponsor, which is Key Hose. That's Key Hose, and Key Hose is, if you're listening to us, that's Key Hose. I'm not seeing the Key Hose outside yet, so maybe it's just me. But Key Hose is a great sponsor of Fire Engineering. They make an incredible product. We all use Key Hose, so we're not just saying that out of hand, but they make an incredible product. If you haven't used Key Hose yet, please go to their website. That's Key Hose, and take a look at the fine bevy of products that they have available to you. They're just an amazing thing. One of the things that Key Hose always tells you about is to test your hose, so that whatever your target flow is, you've got to really look at it. You can't just trust your gauges. You got to know how to evaluate your flow rates, and Key will help you to do that. So they are the hose experts. They're a company that we absolutely admire and very grateful to for supporting us. So without further ado, I'll bring the other two guys in board, and we're going to talk a little bit about fires and buildings under construction. And if you go to the FE.com website today too, there's a great article on there on buildings under construction and what to do when you're looking at those issues. But without further ado, Mike, why don't you say hi and give us a little background?
Hi, my name is Mike Dugan. I'm a retired captain. I'm a regular here, so most of you, if you watch this, should know me. If you're new, again, I'm Mike Dugan, and we're going to have some fun today talking about buildings under construction, demolition, and abatement. And abatement's a big one with the asbestos and the asbestos abatement and things like that. So I think it's a very, very pertinent topic. We can talk about some of the fires we've had and some of the things we've been to, and then give you some resources and some things to put together for your area and everything else. The one thing I will tell everybody is, if you have a building in your district, I don't care if you're a small rural volunteer up to a big city guy, you have a building under construction, demolition, or abatement in your district, you should know where it is, and you should be out there checking that building every week or so, and have the members out there looking at this building, because they change daily, and you should know what's going on with these things and pay attention. And we will get into depth in that.
Hi, I'm Daryl Liggins. I'm a captain in the Oakland, California Fire Department. This is my 27th year on the job, and if you've seen the news over the last couple of years, we've had a tremendous amount of massive fires with buildings under construction. I think we had 3 or 4 within a 2-year span. One of them was the same building that burned twice, all of them arson. A lot of help from the ATF helping us out. And so we have some relevant recent experience with these types of buildings, and I can tell you a few things that we've done in Oakland to help with these fires. But we're not unique in the construction that's going on. There's a lot of big cities with a lot of cranes going up, a lot of wood frame buildings going up. We just, I think, had a unique experience of some individuals that didn't want those buildings going up and burning them down. But they're tremendously difficult to stop, and they're extremely dangerous, and we're lucky we got away with getting these fires extinguished without any injuries to civilians or serious injuries to firefighters.
And it's a really big issue, and I know that the NFPA just issued some new guidelines about what you have to do while a building is under construction in terms of how far you can get without it being sprinklered, and having resources on site. And it was really kind of interesting. It's a really timely topic, because I don't know, it was during FDIC, So was that a month ago? The guys in Iowa had a pretty good fire at a building under construction, and and it was a good ripping fire because there's no none of the protections built in. There's just a myriad of issues. I think it was Montgomery County, Maryland, Mike. They had a big stop about 2 or 3 years ago. Raleigh had a pretty good one under construction a year or two ago. So let's get right into it. Oftentimes when we're talking about a building under construction or under renovation, the day-to-day activities there are hard for us to monitor. So a lot of what we can anticipate is going to be based upon the progress of the construction, thus far. So as far as first due responsibilities, I know we always try to, at least keep up to speed on what was going on and how far along the the building might have been, so that we could have some anticipation of what we might be up against. But the issue with buildings under construction is you could have like a lumber yard on top of a platform, and there's no sprinklers, there's nothing to stop the fire spread. So your flow rates are going to be off the charts. Your positioning is going to be difficult. I guess the most famous one that I can remember, I'm actually down in Key West today. I'm in the lobby of the Margaritaville Hotel. So the most famous one I can remember was, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Yuba City. Is that how you say it? Yuba City, Florida, Mike?
Yes. Or Ybor City. Ybor.
Ybor, right. And that one went for blocks. I mean, that fire would consume blocks and blocks and blocks. And so that was the biggest one I can remember. But they happen all the time. And I've had a few of them. It was years ago. I had a few of them, but they never really got out of hand for us. We never got to one that got, beyond where we couldn't deal with it. But one of the issues that we had, which was interesting, was we had some fire, and on site was it was a combination of some green concrete. So we had to use defensive streams, and I mean, we really couldn't even get close to it because the guys running the site told us you got green concrete that's holding those, that's surrounding that area where the fire had located. So, and we were fortunate we could get close enough, and with some deck guns and some aerial devices, we were able to knock it down pretty quickly. But when you have to position to fight these fires, it's a fascinatingly, wickedly complex issue.
One interesting thing you said is, positioning to fight these fires. Obviously, some of these fires, the sky may be lit up when you pull out of the firehouse or turn the corner. Our last one actually was companies on the scene with nothing showing on arrival. And as they're investigating, a firefighter saw some smoke. And by the time they stretched a large line, they said the building just exploded into flame. And next thing you know, this was a 7-story of wood above, what was going to be stores involved. And one of the first due ladder companies, we often think about this with wildland fires as like escape routes. Had to get a battery powered hearse tool to cut through a fence and retract the ladder and move the truck out of the way, in the meantime damaging some of the paint and light. And it was just so rapidly spreading. So we have to think about our apparatus spotting really early on, and if nothing is showing, doesn't mean nothing is going on. Things can change very rapidly.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I was a lieutenant, a young lieutenant, and pre 9/11, I think it was the largest fire ever in New York City history. It was the Hotel St. George. It was an 18th alarm in New York City. So you can imagine, I was working in Brooklyn and I saw my friends from my old company in Harlem at the same fire as me, which is unheard of in the city of New York. But there was a 9-story hotel under construction, old wooden, that was vacant at the time. Fire was in there. Our people went in, FDNY people went in. By the time they got up there, because there were no elevators, hoofed up, there was too much fire, the chief ordered us down. But the tower ladder, I was in the 95-foot tower ladder in front of the building, and it got so hot so quickly that we had to move the tower ladder and reposition because of the radiant heat from that fire. But these buildings can be very, very, very dangerous to us. We can have a lot of problems with these buildings. So knowing your buildings, knowing what their fire load is, knowing if the elevators work. In the city of New York, they now have a program, okay? It's called the Construction Site Fire Safety Manager. And what this is this is a course that somebody on the construction site has to take. They have to have a site safety manager and a construction fire safety manager. Anytime they're doing construction, he has to be certified by the FDNY. He's gone down and taken a test, and he's going to verify that the standpipe is working to a certain point. It can be capped 2 floors below the working floor, but it's got to have an alarm on it for the air. If anybody opens it, it's got to have a compressor to keep the air out, because a lot of these buildings aren't heated, okay? And the standpipe has to be working to an area where we can use it. Because again, in the city of New York, a lot of times we're going very high with these buildings. And we have to make sure we understand how these are going on, because buildings under construction and renovation, there can be a loss of what we think is there. There have to be elevators in place in the city of New York. There have to be at least 3 fire service elevators available for the fire department, or an external construction hoist if the elevators aren't in yet, that is manned 24 hours or usable with the fire department key, that we can go up and down in this elevator for fire protection ideas. We also, I mean, there are so many laws about this stuff. Now in the city of New York, your shanty towns, for all of your different jobs, they have to have a ceiling mounted sprinkler head dry chemical extinguisher in there. So if something happens in the shanty, this goes off like a sprinkler head, but it's a dry chemical extinguisher. They have to be made of non-combustible materials so they don't burn, and they can only have an oil-filled heater in the shanty. They can't have any electric heaters that are not an oil-filled heater, nothing with an element in there. And they're really trying to get this in place. They have it in place, but they're really trying to get this followed through by everybody so that we eliminate some of these construction sites. The typical things, you have to look at your construction sites and see what's going on there. That's why, as a member of the fire company, no matter how close, how new, anything else you are, you have to go and visit this construction site and go there frequently. Meet the super, meet the trades, and know who the people are. Who's in charge of the sprinkler system, who's in charge of the standpipe system, all the other things that you're going to need, who's running the elevators, who's the electric contractor. You should know all these people, because this is going to help you if there's ever an emergency.
Yeah, I'll tell you, our companies now, at the direction of the battalion chiefs, will visit these sites, and the battalion chiefs have just created a list of things to check when we go visit the site. And I'll tell you, with the number of the fires they've had down there, the feeling of the companies going out isn't, what if this fire occurs? It really feels like there's like a probability that something may really happen because of the arson down there. And the people running the construction project, they have the same feeling. They know what's been going on. So they're really on our side. We get to know them. But some of the questions we want to know are, do you have full-time security guards? And we will talk to the security guards and let them know that they can't have employees on their phone. They need to be paying attention. They need to have flashlights, walking around the building, and letting them know the seriousness of the civilian safety as well as our safety. The other thing we'll want to know is how many employees they have, in the building, and know the stages of the fire protection system. Obviously, we want to know where fire hydrants are, but we need to know not just where fire hydrants are, but the main sizes, because we're using a tremendous amount of water. And we're fortunate MDT in our engines will tell us the main size. Sometimes we will have a 6-inch main and 20-inch main on the same block. So just being able to identify that could be a very valuable information. I talked to one construction supervisor that said, yeah, we have a full-time security team. It's a new team. We just fired the old one because we got to the job site and there was graffiti on the wall. And he told that security team, you had people too close to my building overnight. We can't have that. So we need somebody new.
So I'm just going to take a quick second here to dovetail on what Mike and Daryl just said. I want to speak for a minute about the Wood Council, the I-Chiefs, and the ICC recently put out a construction site manager's fire safety guide handbook, which is pretty interesting. It addresses like 3 specific areas, like how to prevent fires, obviously, how to help manage responses, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to introduce you. A friend of mine just stopped in. This is Dennis. I'm down here in Key West, Florida, and there's Dennis. And Dennis has actually done 225 stair climbs. He's going to do 343, one for each of the fallen on 9/11 from the FDNY, and just a really wonderful guy, old friend. And he was down here with me this week. We were just down here in Key West talking about how to do better fire prevention education, oddly enough. And one of the things, oddly enough, that we didn't talk about, Dennis, which is kind of fascinating to me, was construction sites. It was one of the things which was, in hindsight now, glaringly an oversight on our part, because tremendous concern, tremendous life safety hazard, and but we neglected that. So it's interesting, even in a room full of 40 or so elegantly trained fire protection people, we kind of focused on the kids, and we focused on the homeowners and sprinklers and stuff like that. But buildings under construction and demolition and renovation, what we really failed to address, which is something that I'll make sure I'll get that back to the folks that were here this week talking about that, because kind of interesting that we would miss that, right? And again, goes back to what we talked about a little bit about having more practitioners in the room. So it was a fascinating conversation. So I just wanted to introduce you to a young man who has done 225 climbs so far, and his goal is to do 343. And still counting. Yeah, he's not giving up. Yeah, he's hard at it. And I don't know if you can see the lovely young lady who just joined us, but that's Yvonne, and she's actually a fire prevention educator, and she's done a wonderful job. And Yvonne has developed some games, actually, which is a modern word, and for firefighters to learn more about fire prevention, also help to share the fire prevention messages. We're actually having a Google Hangout. The guys can't hear you, but they can hear me, and you can wave. And we're talking about responding to and managing construction site fires and renovation fires. And I was just sharing with Dennis how we failed to talk about that for the last 3 days here, which is fascinating, because it's on the rise. There are like 4,000 buildings under construction in the United States at any one given time, and another 4,000 or 5,000 under demolition or renovation. Major commercial type operations. And so the hazard is real, and it's prevalent, and it's everywhere. And the instance of it is widespread. And so we were kind of visiting about that. It was just fortuitous that you two had stopped down. But think about that. The last.
No, I do our climbs with you and understanding leadership.
Right, but we didn't even talk about building. We didn't talk about buildings under the, which is fascinating, a fascinating insight. Yeah, right. We went right to life safety, which is fascinating. It's like that gigantic flame, that we all go to. But I just wanted to introduce you two guys to the audience and say hi. Yeah, there's the future right there. Young people, they got all their hair and teeth. So almost their hair. Good to see you, Dennis.
Thank you.
Love you, dear. You guys, it was lovely getting to meet you. Sorry for the interruption, everybody. And so we're back. So I was mentioning earlier that that there's a brand new publication that's coming out, which I think is going to be really important for the fire service. And the exact title of it, I'm not sure, but it's coming out through the I-Chiefs and the ICC, and basically it's going to have some enhanced requirements for construction projects. Some of it's really simple, right? Like they're just doing a simple renovation of one floor. They're just doing a remodel. It'll be like a one-page form that they can hand to the fire department upon our arrival and all that other stuff. But then there are other parts of it where they talk about, increasing the role of a fire watch, and then all the way down to the role of the safety manager on some of these bigger projects, where there'll be someone who will actually be there to help us with where to spot our apparatus and where the water sites are, where some of the bigger hazards are going to be. So it's a really fascinating development that, oddly enough, coincides with this. But so I think that, and I'm trying to find I'm looking for the site where you all can get a look at this. And I'm scrolling through some sites here real quick because I was reading about it the other day. Here it is. If you go to www construction fire safety training, or if you just go to the fire marshal's site, they can direct you to there, and they have a great training program about what to do at construction fires and sites. So I thought I'd throw that out there and go back to Mike and Daryl. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. And I just want to say that's the National Association of State Fire Marshals. And their website is www.firemarshals.org. Under programs, they have the construction site program that you can look at there. You can also Google FDNY, and it's the S56, which is the Construction Site Fire Safety Manager, and that is downloadable as a PDF. And it's a 140-page document, and it goes through all the things that the FDNY does: container protection, hazardous materials, aerosols after the fire in the hardware store, the Father's Day fire, and what you have to have, the smoking, the fire guards. Our fire guards, every day after construction, they're required to have fire guards until midnight. And then from midnight till the start of work the next morning, they can have a fire watch, but the guard has to have a certificate of fitness and has to patrol the site until midnight. Okay, so I think it's very important that we understand that there are ways we can help prevent these fires by putting plans of action in place. And also, I mean, in this book that the fire department gives you, it has the different fires. We can talk about the Deutsche Bank, the AOL Time Water. We can talk about the buildings in China where people are missing. We can talk about all of these things. The Kmart distribution center in the 80s in Pennsylvania, where the sprinkler was impaired, and just what happened to all of these things and how it went bad for us. So these are really important things for us to look at and try to learn and set up a program in our local jurisdiction for these places. Anytime a construction permit, demolition, or an abatement of a hazardous material, it's a lot of times it's asbestos. Anytime one of those permits is issued, the fire department has to be notified, and you have to be able to get in there and find out exactly what's going on.
One thing that we, was apparent after some of our experiences recently is that, these fires, when they do happen, we're not putting these fires out. We could have a lot of companies show up, opening their deck guns and starting ladder pipes, but for the most part, it's going to be a big water show, and we're not conditioning the fire. So one is for companies to have the discipline to really consider the effectiveness of the stream that they're playing on the building, because the main focus is to make sure that this incident doesn't expand beyond the boundaries that it already is when we arrive. And that's primarily going to be protecting exposure. So we may have to shut lines down or reduce our tip size on certain streams to give the people that are going to be more effective water. And that can require a lot of discipline. The other thing is they throw up a lot of brands and embers and start other spot fires on rooftops of homes and fences, grass, things like that. Have enough companies so you can have a patrol. You can use PD because they have a lot of cars on the street that could go there, because a lot of these fires are in the middle of the night and roof fires and things may go unchecked. So we have put together usually like 5 companies as a brand patrol to go in those areas downstream where the embers are landing, trying to mitigate those other spot fires as they're happening. And those other fires, the roof fires and all, you know, as far as incident command, do not have to be its own separate incident. You know, a lot of the chiefs are already going to be tied up at the main fire. So this is one where you may be setting up branches and just have an area command, and all the other incidents are going to be their own branch. The first under construction fire I went to in my career was my first couple years in Oakland, and we had 18 homes downstream of a construction fire with 70-mile-an-hour winds catch fire. We can't set up every single home as its own first alarm assignment. We're just running out of companies.
Says taxi, says fire.
Those are some of the challenges that we'll have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, that one of the reasons why I like this thing from the ICC and the fire marshals is that one of the big issues that we face when we're doing these fires is that we don't know what materials, what floors are completed. So if you do have a fire that you think you can gain access to, it's a sporty move to go for it, right? Because you've got to you got to make that decision up front and hopefully be right. And so yeah, it's a fascinating opportunity for disaster. And I think that when you look at not just buildings under construction, but buildings under demolition, obviously the Deutsche Bank, is just a dramatic example of how difficult these fires can be, because it tested the resources and capabilities of the world's greatest fire department, pushed them right to the limit. And so, you got to keep that in the back of your head all the time. And as we always say, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when you're going to be challenged. And I apologize. I am in the lobby of a hotel and trying to manage electronics and noise and everything else. And so my camera apparently has gone south on me, and I apologize for that. But I just want to we're at the halfway point, and I wanted to mention our great sponsor, Key Hose, and a wonderful group of people that I just absolutely love. And Key Hose has been a tremendous sponsor of fire engineering, FDIC. They make some of the best product in the entire world. Go to the old www, but it's just keyhose.com, and they've got training there. They've got some of the best hose in America there. They've got all kinds of insight as to how to ensure that you're getting the target flow that you're really looking for. They really are the experts when it comes to helping you manage getting your flow right, regardless of what kind of nozzles you use, smooth bore, straight, fogs. That's irrelevant. It's all about the target flow, and the basic doctrine for the fire service is placing water effectively at the seat of the fire. Really, and nothing else when we're talking about firefighting. That's the art and science of the firefighter. If you want to boil it down to a single doctrine, it's applying water effectively at the seat of the fire, and effectively has a lot inside of it, right? Location, flow rate, all that good stuff. But when it comes to hose, you can always depend upon Key Hose. And I know that there's a lot of really interesting work going on right now with True Diameter, and there's a lot of, and Key Hose has been involved in all that, as well as looking at some innovative ways to move water inside of buildings. And we're talking about buildings under construction right now, so and under renovation. So with renovations, always remember that you may not have standpipes that are functional. You may have systems that aren't hooked up yet. And part of what's happening with our fire marshals, and God bless them for this effort, is that now with a one-page sheet, you could roll up and find out, by gosh, nothing's hooked up here. This is we got to find hydrants that are good, and this is defensive fire. Or they may have an educated fire marshal there who's going to be able to tell you, no, this is definitely something you want to be looking at from the ground. And the other side of that is that Key has been working on a 2-inch hose that I know is working with on their high-rise systems. And remember that you've got your pre-93 and post-93 standard high-rise systems. So some are high pressure, some are just 65 psi at the discharge. So make sure you know what kind of standpipe you're working off of in any building, whether it's under renovation or not under renovation, whether it's completed or not completed. Understand the system first that you're working off of. And as we look at these new buildings under construction, and in particular some of what are being called these platform buildings, a lot of these buildings are going to be under some codes which are common areas will be sprinkled, but not the individual occupancies. So where the fire occurs is going to be really important, and knowing what's on that floor that may be on fire. It could be roofing materials, it could be acetylene, it could be any myriad of combustibles that you're just not planning on. So thank you to Key Hose for being with us through all this. And I think one of the other things, and Daryl kind of touched on it a moment ago, and I wanted Mike to expand on it a little because I know he's got some experience in this realm, and I know Daryl does too. As much as, under construction, they're generally not occupied, and it's a fair assumption that they're not. But oftentimes, during renovations, parts of these buildings can be occupied, including, hotel spaces. So you may have people who are really not familiar with the building while they're doing some major renovation. I think the Ramada Inn fire is a tremendous example of that, where they had a large amount of carpet stored in the stairwell, and that carpet caught fire, and subsequently, I believe it killed 8 or 10 or 12 people. But it was a really tough fire. You can Google Ramada Inn fire, but it's a historic fire, and that was a building that was under renovation, and people were still in it. So I'll throw that one out there to the troops as to how and what do you look for, and how do you manage that locally within Las Vegas, and then the FDNY.
Well, in the FDNY, what happens, Bobby, is if they're renovation, they can only take one floor of the system if the building is occupied out of service at a time. They're not supposed to do more than one floor at a time. Sometimes they do. But if they do more than one floor, they have to follow all of these rules that are much stricter than doing one floor at a time. But it's going to be all of the rules in place with the fire watch, with the guards, with the people for torch work, with all the materials. The New York City Fire Department rules are extensive in this, and that's why there are people with a certificate of fitness that have to take an FDNY test and get a license to do this job, have to be on the site, and they go in there and they look at these people to do these jobs and do them properly and to follow the rules. If you're doing torch work, you have to cover all the combustibles. You have to have a fire watch. You have to have an extinguisher or a charged hose line. You have to have 35 feet. If you're in a place where you can't see, it's a combustible floor, everything has to be covered or wet down. And then if there are places on the other side of the wall that you can't see from where you are, you have to have somebody on the other side of the wall to follow those rules. To watch other spaces. We have had major issues in the city of New York with somebody using a torch and not using it properly and setting a fire. We can go back to using a torch and setting a fire. We can go back to Avalon Bay in New Jersey. And that burnt down for the second time. It was once under construction and another time when they were using a torch improperly. So you have to have the rules in place. You have to have the set plans there in your department to do this. The other thing that I'm going to tell you is I think one of the biggest things is torch applied roofing systems. Okay, where they're putting roofing on. I don't know about you, but I've probably been to 15 fires in my career where the roofers were up working on the roof and the roof decking underneath was combustible and they set it on fire. So having these systems in place for the people doing the job, where they have to do, if you are working with a torch on a roof, you have to have someone at the top floor underneath that torch, watching the top floor to make sure that you're not heating up, whether it's a metal deck roof or whatever else, that you're not heating it up enough. In the city of New York, they have now outlawed using a torch on a roof deck of combustible construction. You can't use it on anything made out of wood anymore. Not everybody's following the rules. Not everybody's a licensed company. But you see somebody working on a roof in your area, you should go find out what they're doing. See what's going on. Go up there and find out. and see what kind of roof is going on there. It's going to help you, number one, in your company. Let's just say in this building right here, they're putting a gypsum roof over on a building because of a water leak. You now know that you have a wooden decked roof, and over the top of it, they've made an inverted or a rain roof that they're channeling the water away using a gypsum plank and 2x4s. Well, if you cut that roof, which you might, you're not going to see what's under there because you have a whole nother roof underneath you. So you have to know what's going on would be really, really, really important, and going to these sites and paying attention with them.
Yeah, a couple things I was thinking about that is relevant to buildings under construction and under renovation is the cranes are, almost always going to be present. And even though some workers may think everybody got out of the building, we got to remember there may be a crane operator still up in the crane. And if you haven't seen a video, many years ago in the city of Atlanta, there was a very dramatic rescue that
Matt Mosley was the rescuer.
Oh, I was watching it live that day. It really made the fire service look good. He did a tremendous job where they rescued a crane operator. It was hot enough that it caught his operating area in the crane on fire, and he was out at the end of the crane and in peril, and they thought that crane may collapse, so they picked him off of that crane. I think the whole fire service was proud of him that day.
It was a helicopter rescue, and the rescuer was a guy named Matt Mosley. They did a presentation at FDIC the year after or so. So I believe it was like 2002, Mike, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so there's another, building under construction issue that you might not think about. Trapped and imperiled workers that could be well above grade. That's a great example, Daryl, and really kind of dovetails into the Deutsche Bank deal, where it was firefighters who were way above grade that were imperiled and who had gone up to extinguish a fire in a building under renovation, which was a little bit different, but fascinating. Both of them fascinating events, and I think that I applaud the efforts of the ICC and the fire marshals too, and our friends at iChiefs for coming up with this new handbook and guideline for it. It struck me as interesting, and I want to throw this out to the two of you too, because I think as we're talking about, and by the way, we realize our video is kind of corrupted right now, so I know you're just getting our audio. We have our engineering team is working on it. I think it might be the fact that all of us are in such interesting locations trying to get this to you. But one of the things that it struck me while we're talking about this, when I was looking at the groups that collaborated, was one of the groups that collaborated on this guidebook was the Wood Council. And as we all know, that there has been tremendous efforts lately by the Wood Council, by others, in the area of wood high-rise buildings. And so, now we're going to be talking about high-rises, wood, under construction, that could be, 16, 17, 25, who knows, 30 stories tall. And prior to there being fire protection, it's going to be a fascinating fire problem while they're under construction. Now, all the discussions that I'm hearing from people that are involved in this, especially on the industry side, is that the passive fire protection is going to be, paramount to them, and that they're going to do an exceptional job, and that they're not, we all have visions of the 1800s and the late 1800s, and like the fire that killed John Bresnan in 2003, I believe it was, in New York. That was at the lamp factory on 23rd Street, where John Bresnan got killed. And so anyway, we all have visions of those antiquated buildings, but they're saying that with the modern fire protection capabilities, and even in terms of passive fire protection, that's that they're going to be safe. The jury's still out on that. I know we've got a long way to go. We've got many voices that I want to hear from before we weigh in, definitively on it one way or the other. But the discussion's on, and obviously they're playing, and they're playing. They're participating in the discussion by evidence of this handbook that's out. So as you look at it, you're going to see their participation, which is good. I mean, it's always better to talk to people than not talk to people, because they're building these buildings, and we need to know more about what's going on. So I don't know if it's getting better for y'all. I had some background noise. I don't know. That seems to have just cleared up for me, but I'll throw that out to Mike and Daryl about. I think we need to discuss a little bit before we wrap it up today about the different types of buildings. We kind of touched on the platform buildings where you have like a non-combustible first, and then multiple stories above it of wood frame. Obviously we have our glass and steel buildings under construction, which we're very familiar with. We have our concrete, renovation type buildings where it's primarily a concrete base, and those are compartmentalized buildings. We're very familiar with those. But we're going to have the advent of a building that's predominantly wood, and even those platform buildings, although they may only be today, we're mostly looking at 3 and 4 and 5 story. That's still, you better treat that like a high rise, that fuel load. I'm not convinced at all that we're classifying those correctly yet.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I also think a major factor in it is they're talking about the passive fire protection systems. But what happens to those buildings if, let's just say, we have a cold winter like we had 2 years ago, and there's an area where the sprinkler system is not fully protected and a pipe breaks, it freezes. And now we have a water leak and we have to shut the system down. Well, when we shut the system down, depending on where the line is, can we only isolate a floor, or are we shutting the whole system down? If we've now eliminated that passive, do we have to evacuate that building? Do we have to get everybody out of that building? I mean, if let's just say it's a 10-story residential building. Some of the ones I've seen up in Canada, they have people living in them. They have student housing. There are buildings, and it's understandable. We have to figure out what the deal is here, and what is the redundancy of these systems involved in there.
Well, and even if we have great codes and we have all of that, that's the compliance issue, right? Because if something happens, we've got to hope that we get notified, and if we don't get notified, to Daryl's point, you better be thinking defensive first, because the unknowns are incredible. I mean, even in a good building fire, when you've got everything working in your favor, the unknowns are incredible. When it's under construction, it's Katie bar the door.
Yeah, and I mean, I had a fire when I was a young fireman where they had been working on the standpipe system and had finished working, and we went into the building and we were told everything was back in service. We couldn't get any water out of the system, and it turned out that the one valve was closed on the standpipe, and we lost a little girl in this fire. I'll never forget it. We lost a young child. She was 5, maybe 6. And it was because somebody didn't open up one valve. And that valve was serving, that was the main riser valve in the staircase we were using for the standpipe. And we couldn't figure out why the problem was. And the engine chauffeur's like, we're pumping, we got water, it's coming out. It's, there's something wrong here. And by the time we figured it out, it was too late. So
sometimes buildings under renovation or construction, really lead to challenges in regards to standpipe operations. And one thing that a lot of departments may not have really considered is how you're going to get water up to, upper floor, similar to like a Deutsche Bank type situation. A friend of mine, Matt Quinn, who's on 69 Engine there in New York, and myself did some drills after talking to Ray McCormick, who had previously done this, where, how are we going to get water up 13 floors? It's not as simple as throwing down a rope and hauling up in a tack line. It's just simply too heavy. Even if you tied a few ropes together, you have wind that may be blowing the rope from the area you want to go. And so really practice those things. We, basically came up with a method with taking your standpipe, 2.5-inch standpipe bundles, and making that into an improvised standpipe. And I know the city of Las Vegas had a believe it was like 7-story building or something where they caught that on tape when they went up there. The standpipe was filling with soil. So this wasn't a building under construction, but the standpipe wasn't working as they thought. The waterway in the ground, it broke and it was sucking up, earth, and basically left the standpipe inoperable. But by hooking those lines up and lowering it down to the ground, telling the pump operator, where that's being lowered, they can, get another section of 2.5 over there, and then use some rope. I'm a big proponent of bringing rope up if you're going aloft. You just don't know how or why you can use it. They secured that in the building and attached their gauge and a shutoff, and you've just made an improvised standpipe system right off the pumper. But you really got to know how to secure this because it's a tremendous amount of weight. And then from there, the next companies are going to hook up their standpipe hose, and now you got basically a regular standpipe operation. But it's going to be a good solid plan B for some buildings under construction or renovation if your standpipes are out of order.
Daryl, I remember that drill. I remember when you guys did that. And how high did you go? How far did you get that stretch to go?
I think the highest I've been is 13 floors. And it's a tremendous.
What kind of pressures were you pumping to get water?
Type of knots. We were using a rolling ditch that they use in the New York City Fire Department, but some guys in Miami-Dade came up with a plate that can go between the couplings, and they can use that as an attachment point. And that's another, method that someone came up to secure that.
And
Wow.
I think the one other thing we have to talk about is we're talking of buildings under construction and things going on there. We have to talk about buildings under abatement because that was the main thing in the Deutsche Bank. And what we mean by abatement is asbestos abatement, any kind of hazardous material abatement, or anything else. In the Deutsche Bank, they sealed off the staircases. They sealed off areas in plastic, and they're doing asbestos removal. And what they did was they cut the standpipe in the basement and were using it as a negative air to funnel the air down so they could catch the asbestos dust and trap the asbestos dust. The problem is anywhere in your district that anybody is doing an abatement with a negative air, where they're pressurizing to keep the pressure inside so they can force the air out into a specific area, you have to know where it is, where the negative air shutoff is, and what kind of things they put in there. Because the plastic, the plywood doors that they put up, it trapped our members, our guys. We were lucky we didn't lose more men at that fire. But anytime anybody's doing any kind of an abatement operation in a building in your area, whatever it's for, it's a building built in the 50s with the asbestos floor tiles, and they're taking up the asbestos floor tiles. They're cleaning off pipes made in the 60s and 70s with the asbestos wrapping on the pipes or whatever else. You have to know where it is. You have to know where the negative air is. You have to know where the escape routes are. You have to go through this building and plan. And listen, it's not fun. You also have to have a setup for some kind of decon for your people. And I know I went through it as a fireman for asbestos once, and it was on Thanksgiving. We were supposed to be having a wonderful Thanksgiving meal working in a firehouse, and we went to a fire in the basement. It was all bundles of asbestos. You got to take off all your clothes out in the street and put on one of those Tyvek suits after taking a shower. It's not a fun day, okay? But you got to have a plan. You got to know how you're going to decon your people. You got to know how you're going to take care of your people, how you're going to get their gear cleaned, how you're going to get them back in service, and how you're going to isolate this area and protect your people.
All of these issues, Daryl brought up the Atlanta rescue. Mike was just talking about the building under renovation. As we talk about all of these issues and the buildings under construction, you're going to have roads that are going to be closed. You may have water mains that are being, shut down or diverted or restricted while they do, hookups or changes or whatever. I mean, all of these things are going to greatly impact your fire attack, and they're going to greatly impact your safety, which is why, again, I'll say that how important this is. It's called the Construction Fire Safety Manager Handbook. That's the Construction Fire Safety Manager Handbook. It comes along with some training. So if you go to www.constructionfiresafety.training, constructionfiresafety.training, or contact the National Association of Fire Marshals, State Fire Marshals at firemarshals.org, you can get that training, you can get that handbook, and you can get the forms and things that you can distribute to sites within your jurisdiction, because responding the elevated risk is phenomenal, and just having those pieces of information in advance might greatly improve your opportunity of successful rescue or successfully extinguishing the fire, or just keeping your people safe. So, please take advantage of those resources that are out there. We talked about everything from, crane operators being trapped to, asbestos abatement, but even, when you have hotels, they're constantly going under renovation. So floors could be closed, and they could be doing, to keep paint fumes from going places. They can throw curtains up during that. That the simplest of things. And one of the things that Mike mentioned, which is always, it's the old firefighter's joke, was if you wonder where your next job is going to be, watch where the plumbing crew is going, right? Because they go and sweat a little pipe, and a couple hours later you got a job. So, and I'm not putting plumbers down; it's just a joke. But if you got a building under renovation and people are going to be using torches, they're going to be cutting, they're going to be doing things in that building that the building wasn't designed for, and that some of the components where they were operating had not been designed for. Plus, you're going to have fire spread that's going to be highly unusual, right? You're going to have a lot of shafts that haven't been sealed yet, that they haven't put all the fire stopping in yet. So your fires are going to be fast. They're going to be dynamic. The Iowa fire is still up there. It was March, so it was in March, and it was Iowa City, I think, or whatever. Anyway, it's still up. It's a great read, good piece of video. You can see where this thing is just taken off, and I think, okay, I took a look at it earlier, and my memory's a little foggy, but I think it was like a three-story. Three stories were up above the platform, and you can see fire within 3 stories, but it's isolated to like one section, and there's a tower that's setting up to go after it. But you can tell by looking at it, it's going to be a 3, 4, 5 tower operation. There's going to be a lot of assets that are going to have to come to play to get after that and just contain it. And contain it's the best you can hope for. But you still got to worry about, as Daryl said, making sure that all the electricians, all the pipe fitters, all the concrete people are off those floors or out of that site or in a safe place, and then isolating and protecting any flammable assets that might be on the ground. So before we wrap it up, I'll let it go around the horn real quick to Daryl and Mike. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye to everybody and thank Key Hose? So back to you guys.
Yeah, there's a couple things I wanted to add, but one is this is not a round fire. It's not that simple. And I'm really speaking from the perspective of wooden frame buildings under construction. These are buildings that are often in a built up area that is surrounded by occupied buildings. And it's going to be in conjunction with interior attacks into some of those other buildings next door. One of them we had collapsed onto 6 condos that were a couple stories each, and there was a lot of interior attack onto those. We have a lot of scaffolding that's going. We had a crane completely collapse on one of these, and another one, a crane was swinging around because they put it in a wind vane mode, so it can always move. But the convection heat had that thing swinging around, near impossible to create a adequate collapse zone. But we really have to be mindful of where is this thing coming down when it does start falling apart. And we have a lot of people sleeping at night in the adjoining buildings. We got to get out. The other thing is just kind of reviewing that we talked about water supply, access, talking to the security guards, talking to the foreman, finding out what's going on if a building's locked up under construction or floors are sealed off or if the standpipe's working. None of that we're going to find out. Got to get out and know some part of our day, understanding the different stages, and not just once a month. These are changing daily. So really just get out there and see your district and the neighboring districts of what's going on with these buildings.
I think that's great stuff. And the other thing I would say to everybody out there is if you're going out to a building that's under construction, demolition or abatement, and you see something, what we do in the city of New York is you send out a memo to all first alarm units about the building. So if you're out on another run and another company goes there first to what's going on in the building, and then you put it in our computer dispatch, our SIDS, computer information dispatch system, in the SID system. The building is under construction. You're going to have to update it as you go through, as things change. But you got to go there, as Daryl said, weekly, every 2 weeks at minimum. But go there and check this building out when they're putting up steel, when they're coming out of the ground, when they're doing different things. If they're digging footings, they're down in the ground. Then you have a possibility of a trench rescue. What are you going to deal with these buildings? If they're demolishing a building, if they're doing whatever else, all of these things, it's incumbent on you to get the information for your firefighters, for the men and women of your department, so that you can be informed about what's happening in the world that they respond to. And you can do your best to protect them and keep them safe.
I think Bobby is unmuted right now.
Sorry about that. One other final thing to remember too is that you may be called to an elevator rescue in one of these buildings. That's another thing that happens oftentimes in buildings under construction and buildings under renovation. And remember that the construction elevators are going to be they may not be what you're used to dealing with, right? They could be open, they can be, because they're basically to move construction workers and materials and such to different floors. So, and they pose an interesting challenge. So I highly recommend that you go to sites and visit with these folks and say, how high are you going to go before this floor is finished off, and what are you going to do? And the men and women who work on these buildings will be more than willing to give you a tour, let you know what's going on, because the last thing in the world they want is a problem. And if something happens, they want it mitigated quickly. That's their livelihood, and they want to protect it just as much as you want to protect it. So, don't hesitate to introduce yourself, let them know who you are, and you're going to learn something, because these people are a wealth of information. You're going to learn everything you're going to need. You're going to learn things to know that once the building is done is going to make you more capable should anything ever happen in that building, right? Because there's the nuances that you can see while something's being put together become invisible once the building's done. And so you're going to see where the plenums are and where all the major, air handling elements are and all the major conduit elements are, which once the drywall goes up and the furnishings go up, they're invisible to you. But they're really important to know about when you're taking on a fire in one of these buildings. So great information, guys. I really appreciate you being with us today. I want to thank our tremendous host, Key Fire Hose is just an amazing partner. Where we couldn't be more grateful for what they do. Please go to www.keyhose.com. That's keyhose.com. They are the fire hose experts, and they have training. They have everything you need to make sure that what you think you're flowing. So we can't recommend them enough. They're really just some of the coolest people out there. They're in Dothan, Alabama. If you're ever down in the great state of Alabama and you want to take an incredible tour, they'd be more than happy to show you their incredible facility. The men and women who work there are very proud of it. And from the minute you walk through the door at that facility in Dothan, you realize that you're at a plant where people who recognize that they're part of something bigger than just what they manufacture there. They care about everything that has to do with the fire service. They take a tremendous interest in us. They're welcoming. They have a great little visitor center there. It's a huge plant. It's an amazing place, and it's just go to keyhose.com. And if you're down in Alabama, it's worth the time. At Dothan, Alabama, which is a beautiful place, absolutely gorgeous city, and go visit with the folks at Keyhose. They'd be happy to see you, and glad you stopped in and said hi. So I'm Bobby Halton. On behalf of my good friend Daryl Liggins and my good buddy Mike Dugan, we'd like to thank you for visiting with us today and talking about buildings under construction and renovation and what to do when emergencies occur there. And we focused on fire, but remember, it can be everything from elevators to people trapped on floors above to people getting hit by fallen debris. So, you know, old Frank Brannigan taught us well. He said, know your buildings, know your enemy. So thank you so much for joining with us. We hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll see you here next week on Wednesday's Hump Day Hangout. And thanks from Fire Engineering.